Okay, welcome. Holy cow, Daniel, O.G Rose. It's fantastic to be here. I'm really appreciative that you made the time, Daniel. Um, Today, I mean the inspiration is Esperanza, which is a short story in a collection of short stories under the wing. Um, Daniel writes with his wife Michelle through the pen name O.G Rose. They've recently released The Map is Indestructible, and I'm going to put the link in the description. There's a conversation that just happened with Cadell Last and Daniel that I think is incredibly worthwhile. I just wanted to pin that immediately. Um, but this conversation, we're going to be, there's a feeling of quite an open horizon. Daniel's been very accommodating in the sense of we can speak about anything here. So there's this quality of openness, which is it's always a little bit scary, but this practice of coming to speech is very much what we're about. Um, and I think a part of what's also a little bit this trepidation in the sense of wanting to unfold the personal. So wanting to unfold this dimension that is like testimony, which is which is important. I mean, theologically, but it's hard to get right when we
Mm.
unfold our own story because we can then kind of just loop a bit or just be practicing our narrative or whatever.
Mm.
So for that reason, I'll say a little bit about how I came to read Esperanza. Um, what there was a very specific cathartic moment that had for me, and I'll share. I'll I'll try and express that what it meant to me to read it at that time. And then we'll see where the conversation will go from there. I have a feeling it can go in a number of directions, but um, let me before I do all of that, just hand it over to you, Daniel, and say thank you again for this.
Well, thank you for having me, Daniel. It means a lot that you pick up under the wing and want to talk about Esperanza. Michelle and I really started O.G Rose. I suppose the official getting of the name as a business, etc., is 2011. We did a lot at Unoya, an art gallery, venue, and performance place. But you really also, there was a church there interested in the question, what does the gospel compel you to do as an artist? Like specifically the question of the creative act. So we were working with people like Bernard Hankins, who's spoken word genius, and we'd have many, many discussions on this idea of what does it mean to be made in the image and likeness of God? Are they the same thing or are they different? How should we think of the making of the temple, the covenant, etc.? Like, what is the difference between being a Christian artist and an artist who is Christian? How does one do great? Is there something fundamentally sacramental about great art, or do you need to make it explicitly Christian? So those were always questions we were kind of exploring in that. And, as we're doing that, we're sitting on the back porch of Unoya. I'll write a story, give it to Michelle. She'll write something and give it to me. Typically, what you'll have in various works is you'll have a prime writer and a secondary writer, which is, it's not really where you're sitting side by side every single sentence. We found that didn't really work. And in fact, you're constant, it just gets in the way. You don't go into flow, but you write something, you give it to the other person, and you go back and forth and go back and forth. And it's more than just editing because you're literally discussing the life of the characters, the mindset of the characters. Each person is adding directions or saying this scene doesn't work, or what if you go in this direction? And so, Esperanza comes out of this. All the stories do. There are novels to turn the world, Blackout, The Savior Digressions that are from the same process. Stories like Heroes are in Under the Wing. Then, of course, the story Under the Wing, Hoop, Inside, I can go on. And so Esperanza is from that period. And again, Michelle and I really started our work primarily in fiction and creative writing. And so to have a chance to talk about Esperanza means a lot. So thank you for the chance, Daniel. And it's always wonderful to speak with you.
That's fantastic, and it's already news. I really appreciate that backstory.
Mm.
The the inspiration where you're coming from. And I mean, before I do what I said I was going to do, like the just this. I mean, that this quality really comes through in the writing of the fact that it's co-authored or it's written between husband and wife,
Mm.
and I assume it's threaded the process of becoming husband and wife. And so like just to anyone who's listening, like if you imagine like the kind of dialogue that gets formed when it is actually a dialogical process in the writing
Right.
process, as opposed to, I mean, I was immediately comparing this love story to Romeo and Juliet, like structurally, um, not too intensely or like critically. I don't really come from an art background or anything, but the immediate association, because I was thinking how it was testing all the limits of what you can contain in a story, what a love story is, what like where it takes one, how it concludes, how it implicates the social body in which it happens. Um, yeah, so maybe that comparison at another stage, or I can just jot some thoughts at a later stage. Um, this this okay. So let me speak a bit about how I came to read Esperanza. Um, I think we've set up a nice kind of contextualizing. It's good to know where where the writing is coming from. So I mean I came across your channel. I'm not too sure how long ago. I think the first thing I saw was your method for playing piano, the Daniel L. Patton, yes, Daniel Garner Patton method. And so my ex, who the specific cathartic moment is about a heartbreak in that situation. She was a pianist and she produces psytrance at the moment. But she taught me, Eric Satie Gymnopedia.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That like the bare minimum, but I really couldn't. I can't do I definitely can't play the whole thing, but I can. I figured out that there are a set amount of keys that when you play them, they don't sound bad in relation to one another. So it was this little block, this little pattern that I could play around with and just improvise. And I mean, I would usually go for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes before I kind of exhausted it, and then I would put it down. And so whenever I saw a piano or came near a piano, like I'd play around, play around. So when I found your pattern method with the same logic, but it just expanded the potential patterns to play in, it was a fantastic moment. I was immediately sharing it with people that I met. It's like, look, yeah, look, yeah, look. But it was hard to convey the concept. Like, no, it's just to play. So, um, in recent years, partly because we've broken up, I haven't been around pianos, so I haven't been playing around uh, on that specific musical instrument. So the Daniel L. Garner pattern method. Um, then then I think I don't know who you were in conversation with, but I have a feeling it was Cadell. Um, and it was the first time I heard your notion of the absolute choice or an absolute choice.
Yeah.
And at that stage, what had stuck with me was I don't know if it's the full concept, but just this idea of like it was a reminder of the kind of commitment that weathers any storm. Like this commitment, and then you don't kind of pull away from it. You hold it through. That a meaningful life might need to be grounded in some kind of commitment like that. But also that it's not without danger, that you can commit to something and hold too fast to something, and it can end up being destructive. Um, yeah, hard-headed and and etc. So um, this that's all involved at a moment in my life when I came to I was convicted, and then I confessed into Christian faith, and then baptized in a home church in Grayton. This is now like a year and a bit ago, and I can expand in those areas, but just this first go through the 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 price for confessing was the relationship, and it's it happens that people develop uh, almost are raised or cultured into an aversion to even the word, the Holy Spirit or Jesus. And there's this, and even in myself, like this, the this process of recognizing how submerged those references were in my language and in my thinking, and that I was playing off a certain structure that kind of imitated them or was grounded in them, but I wasn't comfortable in the utterance of the name. And part of that was the both the recoil of the other and my own recoil. I mean, a year before confessing, I'd tried to express what was happening in my life, and I'd said Jesus, I'd said the Holy Spirit in relationship with my partner, and there had been this aversion, and then I had recoiled like it was terrifying. Like I had the sense of I was almost captured by something, and I submerged the language again for a while. Yeah, but I don't want to get too much into the weeds there, and this is going to be the danger with the narrative. This so what then linking into Esperanza, this the process that we went through at Philosophy Portal a few months ago now, where that concluding session, the way that Rebecca Rose Prentice had shared about heroes had been a cathartic moment for you. And it was almost like a permission for myself. The next morning I read Esperanza. And when it came to this specific moment in the story, there was this catharsis. And the moment of the story was at the place where Esperanza recognizes Artemio's, I think I'm saying the name right, his love for Cuba, his love for the Cuban people. So this political love, essentially, and that this was somewhere at what was making it impossible to consummate their love, which was probably also like a pressure cooker that sweetened their love. But this role of the political cause, or the cause of the love for the social body or for people in general, had really struck a chord with me in how I had thought about my motives in terms of confessing, which is the outward expression of belief, which moved social relationships in my life. It meant that I lost the lady that I had proposed to, and the like. So this encountering the story gave this like a sight of recognition of a pattern. But it's almost like when I read it, I was too full with that latent grief, that the way in which the story was told signaled enough that when it came to that point, there could be the catharsis. But in the second reading, you're obviously noticing things that you hadn't noticed in the first. So reflecting back, I can notice how like this almost emotional fullness had obstructed some. It was just the nature of the first reading, so that when it got to that point, it was this catharsis. So I didn't return to the story for a while because I was like treasuring the way in which it had resonated the first time. I'm gonna put it down here. Again, like I guess I'm gonna ask you to watch me in terms of falling into narrative too much, and I would rather serve the progression of the conversation. But let me put it there.
Well, I'm very glad you shared the narrative, and thank you, Daniel, for sharing all of that. I think the association, so first, yes to the pattern method and just playing and staying within shapes. I think there are a lot of people who, because they don't have their first encounter with music in terms of patterns, that you go from the pattern to the notes, I think actually more people would get into music and love it versus building up from the notes into the patterns. I think we actually teach music in the wrong direction, and I think it becomes a lot more fun and a lot more exciting when you feel like you can just sit down and play. So thank you for bringing that up. I think also the absolute choice is extremely important because I do think you have to make a choice that functions as an absolute to you. And in being absolute, it also has a certain nakedness to it. Like it is absolute. Like you cannot give justification for it because it is the ground of possibility for justification because it is the choice by which you define reality. And you can't really justify the choice by which you define reality ultimately because you have to take that choice before you can even determine the terms of justification. And ultimately, stuff like that kind of notion of an absolute choice or some sort of absolute that can only be stepped into by the subject, and that the subject has to be in, and they really may make a wrong decision, and they may not, but they decide, is very, very often what the fiction of O.G. Rose is going to be looking at, like into a certain situation of a certain absolute choice, right? Because when you're talking about conversion to Christianity or the Holy Spirit of the thing, there's something that makes it it's always possible, like you have to make the choice, right? That will redefine the kind of world you're in. If you start believing in Jesus, it's not simply choosing vanilla versus chocolate. It changes the entire horizon by which all things are situated in reality. It gives all phenomenon a different quality, right? And so it is an absolute choice in that it changes the horizon according to which all choices are made, right? And of course, you can always question that. And there's a certain nakedness and vulnerability in that choice because if people ask for reasons, it's not that you don't have reasons, but those reasons are bound to you and your conditionality and your particularity. And there's always a certain limit to how much you can extend those to other people, especially if it requires openness to get it. But people need reasons before they're open. But by definition, those reasons come after the openness. So if you have to be open to get the reasons, and you won't open until you get the reasons, then you have a major problem. And ultimately, the matters of absolute choice have this structure where in order to get it, you have to be open to it, but that means you can't need reason to be open. You just have to make the choice. Well, that's an absolute choice right there. You choose to do it and then the reasons come. But there's always the question of if those reasons are just brainwashing or ad hoc, right? But that's why courage is at the heart of this, because you always have to hold to that initial absolute choice. And then, of course, the absolute choice gets tied to the girdle point that comes up in the map is indestructible, etc., so forth. And so certainly we see Esperanza and Artemio caught in a situation of having to make a certain absolute choice on how they are going to relate to one another. Also, it is very important that stories change from first reading to second reading and that there are details that are not picked up on. I think fiction that cannot be reread and have different things come out actually is missing something. I'm not sure if fiction is any better than its rereading. The first reading is supposed to have, in my opinion, emotional resonance. If it doesn't have that, there's significant trouble. And then the second go is where you start noticing things. And you say, well, wait a minute, in this dialogue, there's a double meaning here. Or wait, why did Esperanza do that? And you start asking these different questions that then start unfolding the story in different ways. I do think fiction is no better than its rereading. But what you were saying on Romeo and Juliet, I think that's a very wise association. Heroes references Romeo and Juliet, and in an indirect way that is coming up in Esperanza. One of the kind of key notions is that you can't separate questions of love from the worlds that people are in their worldviews. Worldviews are not something accidental to us. They structure our very being. And they set up the horizon by which we can make choices. And people are torn in romance between their beliefs and their feelings, between their ideas of, say, a good career and how they want to spend time. People are torn in the religious choice. It is not merely a choice of, do I want to be with this person or not? That tends to be the mistake of most works of romance, is they simply ask questions, do you want the person or not? There's not enough, dare I say, tragedy. And by tragedy, I have in mind Martha Nussbaum, which is competitions of competing goods. You have to choose between competing goods. In Antigone, do you serve the gods or do you serve your family? Do you serve honor or do you serve justice? There are all these kind of tensions, and you have to choose. You can't get both, right? Most people's experience of romance, if it really is deep, involves trade-offs between competing things. Ultimately, they come to a place where they have to choose between serving their religion or serving their, the romance, serving their family or serving their call, serving what God is calling them to do or serving what would make a good career or something, right? You are ultimately brought to those choices. And I think a romance that is actually getting to the depths of things, and I do think romance that doesn't get to the depths of things is in trouble. You'll hear that in that advice, when you're dating someone, whatever you do, don't talk about, politics, religion, stuff like that. No, if there's anything you want to talk about, it's those things, because those are the things that are going to come out. And if you repress them, then you're in trouble. But if you bring them out, you run the risk of these theo-political tragedies, right? And basically, I think very often people's relationship advice is to structure the avoidance of tragedy. But the avoidance of tragedy is also the necessary risk for depth in emotional resonance. Like, if you don't take this risk, you're going to lose a certain depth because you're actually fragile. Your love is no stronger than the degree that you avoid the most important topics. Because religion's the most important stuff in people's lives. And if you're avoiding that and can't talk about that, then you're literally saying we can't talk about the most important things in two people who want to spend their lives together, right? It's very problematic ideas. But then, if people have deep religious or political, or I could go on, loves, well, that runs the risks of certain conflicts arising, or certain choices have to be made. I really also like, and I'll give it to you after this, is this notion in your personal narrative of the confession, and how the confession leads to the tension. Well, the whole story, one of the things that led to Esperanza is this. The story is playing on the idea of show don't tell in fiction. This idea that you should show, but you shouldn't tell, right? And the question is that possible? Is it possible for Esperanza to show without telling, right? Because there's this idea of if she tells, then you're in big trouble, right? Or is that impossible? Do you ultimately have to tell? And in fact, do we avoid telling because we're afraid? And we don't want, and we're saying, no, we don't have to confess. We can just show, or we can make it work, right? Or can art or the dance or showing actually do the work of verbal confessing? Is it possible or is it not? And Esperanza has her reasons for why she thinks this way. We're also considering this idea as show don't tell that you often hear in creative writing fiction classes, because a lot of the work, we strongly believe that we think fiction has been in decline for quite a bit. And we think one of the reasons fiction and literature has been in decline is because, well, there are no ontological stakes. You basically are not allowed to bring philosophy into fiction. It shouldn't be talking about big ideas. It should be about, say, personal experience, personal identity, self-discovery, and so on and so forth. Now, all of that has a role, but we are of the opinion that literature is uniquely positioned, if done well, which of course we'd have to explain what that means, but if done well, to actually take on philosophical and deep emotional issues in a manner that other art forms cannot do in the same way. I'm not necessarily saying better or worse, but uniquely. Why that is the case is because of the first-person narrative, the voice in the head, focalization, the ambiguity in the William Epson sense, and other particular techniques that are available in literature that are not available in other art forms, that have their own techniques that aren't available in literature, but every art forms are not interchangeable. They shouldn't be, and if they are, there's actually a problem. They each afford techniques that are not afforded by the others. And the kind of story one tells should actually be very intimately tied to the particular medium you are in. Now, I'm happy to go into detail on that, but we are of the opinion that some of the most pressing philosophical issues can actually be discussed in literature in ways that can't be in other forms. And we're also of the opinion that the deepest emotional experiences are also tied to the deepest philosophical issues as well. That it's actually not. Many people are of the opinion that philosophy gets in the way of emotion. We're actually of the opinion that it's the complete opposite. That if it's done correctly, they actually go together. Because philosophical quandary, or we could say here theo-political quandaries, those bring you to the place of a situation like Esperanza and Artemio. It is those theopolitical tensions that bring you to the heart wrench, that brings you to this dire moment with Esperanza and Artemio, that brings you to this powerful experience of emotion. So if you say no, the theopolitical, the philosophical has nothing to do with literature, then you don't have the resource to bring characters to some of the deepest experiences of human beings. Some of the hardest and deepest experiences that I think there are many people on planet Earth that actually wrestle with. But if literature and art in general aren't discussing those things, then people don't have the resources they need for their own lived experiences. So this story, as just another kind of reason for the existence of the story, is also as a subtle story about the idea of fiction writing as show don't tell. Is this actually what fiction writing, is this really the advice fiction writing should take? If not, though, how do you tell well? How do you show well? What's the best way to go about those things, and other questions? But I will pause and I will give it back to you, Daniel.
Oh, that's beautiful, Daniel. It's funny to hear Daniel, Daniel.
Mm-hmm.
There's the yeah, sure. I mean, so I'm reflecting on this medium right now, and these technologies that we have, this space of Zoom, your presence on YouTube, on Substack, it is the reason why I've connected with your work and why we've connected. We connected through the network. You're in Virginia, I'm in Johannesburg, South Africa. It's a pretty long walk. I think you need a boat as well. So I mean, we've connected in this way. Then we can have this one-to-one conversation where it's you and I. It's recorded. So then there's also the presence of a potential other who observes. So that I love the analogy almost with the Platonic dialogues that's there. It's a recording of dialogue.
Mm.
There's this just because it's the dialogue that I've been reading recently is the Parmenides, and when Socrates is speaking to Zeno about his idea of the many, or he defended his teacher's view by arguing for the opposite. So I think Parmenides is like the one is, and then people were ripping into Parmenides because he's like, if they're saying to him, if you say the one is, look at all these contradictions that come out. That's what they're saying. So then in like a youthful competitive spirit, Zeno wrote the notes for his response, was saying that if you assume the many are, look at all the ridiculous contradictions you fall into. And then, so the two in kind of conversation with each other like this. But he says to Socrates that that was published, whatever the ancient Greek version of published is, that was published almost like without his consent. And then like his notes were taken and shared. Then like also in the dialogue, there are these little like dramatic pieces that come out. Like there's almost this like coy play before they get into like the analysis of an idea, like the one. And part of that is like the one phrase that's kind of sticking in my mind is like we are here in private, so it's appropriate for us to do this now. You know, it's appropriate for us to now go through this exercise because we're just happening in private here. And that would be opposed to like a public. So these things are in my mind as a large part of the kind of, I guess, the logic with the Holy Cow channel is like recording a process. So a lot of the stuff is just a record of the process, which means it's not the most clean cut final product thing. It's always kind of on the go. Reading groups, study things with an elder, etc. So that's just tying those things there, and I guess it's just a reflection on what's afforded and I guess the strangeness of the one-to-one. Because wanting to touch, if you want to jump in there, then
Well, not to interrupt, what I was going to say is that the YouTube Zoom combination, I think, is an entirely new medium. Like, you have the printing press, the internet, like it's a new medium condition. And I think it's really important because it allows something that really was not possible for any time in history, which is basically the creation of resources for the possibility of overheard conversation by the average person. I think basically one of the key ways that humans learn is through overhearing conversation, by being in the room overhearing a discussion. Well, for most of history, you just happen to have to be at the tavern where Hume and Smith are. Just happen to be in an apostles' meeting where Gödel and Russell are debating. The chances of quality overheard conversations per se was very, very low for most of history. And I think most lectures or learning is from a lecture structure where someone's lecturing at you. I don't think we learn as well in that because we're on defensive and we're nervous from overhearing a discussion between peers or overhearing a discussion between people. And that's what you're now able to do. And the value of this is utterly incredible. Because like you're saying, you're recording this, but you're not really thinking about the fact you forget it, you get lost in the other person. And so you get a recording that's public, and yet the experience of it is private. This was, again, not possible for most of history, because if we were talking in a room with lots of people watching us, we'd know it, right? It'd be really hard to get in the flow, really hard to forget about that fact. And of course, there is going to be a certain level of performance when you are being recorded. But that's not inherently bad, because that actually can kind of elevate your speech or train you to actually speak better and think better. It's not a virtue to not perform at all. The problem is when you become fake in the performance, right? We actually want to be able to speak at a certain caliber and to a certain sort of awareness of what we are saying, and not just kind of flow in a kind of careless way. Because actually, if you do that, you get to the place where you can flow and it be artful. That's kind of the goal, is you actually do it so much that you actually, even in a state of not thinking about it, still have an art to it. And I think that's kind of like what the cipher gets at ultimately, if you do it right. Or I think Butler Yeats said Oscar Wilde was the only man he ever met who could speak in prose. So you have this idea that Oscar Wilde did so much work that he just got to the place where he just spoke prose, He just spoke in structures like that. And it's not that he was trying to, it's just that you get there, right? So I think this medium allows the creation of resources of overheard conversations that actually are by which people learn best, that also allow people to generate. Well, let me put it this way as well. We also, and then I'll give it back to you. I just want to comment on these very important things you're saying. We also underappreciate how much the conversation played a role in the formation of people's thoughts and history. You get this idea, I'll just say of David Hume, as if David Hume came to his ideas mostly alone at his desk in his study. No, then a lot of times it was in conversations with all the other people of the Scottish Enlightenment or the apostles or these different groups, right? The conversation has actually always been at the heart of intellectual development, and many, many, many people's ideas come from discussions. That doesn't mean they're not theirs, but that it's hard to draw the line. And in fact, they come up with their own unique ideas in response to another person. And the ideas they come up with are not from that person, but they needed that person to create the context in which these new ideas could emerge, right? So the conversational, it is very, very difficult to find true contributors to the great conversation who were not part of groups. Basically, it's impossible. They're always part of groups, like always. And the critical thing to that as well is very often we can think of the Bloomsbury group as where all the all-stars gathered. No. It was because they were in the Bloomsbury group they became the all-stars. They didn't know they were all-stars. It's actually the group comes first and then the all-stars, not the other way around. And this cannot be overstated. And this truth of history, the power of the network effect, the social network effect, that network effect can mean different things based on what field you're talking. But the power of the social network effect has kind of been hidden, I think, in history. It has not really been appreciated, that this technology also allows us to see more vividly, to actually be aware of. And if we get evidence of the truth of that, because all of this is also building evidence of that, we might reform the school system. We might change our institutions. We might change how we do education, because you have the model, you have the evidence of what is possible when you create these conditions. Oh, so we have a case study for maybe how we should reform education everywhere, or reform the classroom, or reform institutions. So I think it's very, very important. So I just want to comment on that you brought up.
No, that's beautiful. I'm very glad that you did, because I mean, let me just add a piece of evidence then, like this, because as you're speaking, I was reminded the Parmenides dialogue starts by a group going to find someone because they know that that person's cousin was witness to a conversation that happened between so and so then and then. So like there's like these moments of like the whole thing is about this conversation that happened. These people have traveled from another town to come to this other town because they know that that relative was 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 in the presence of those people who were having that conversation. And then like the entire Platonic corpus is dialogue.
Yes.
And like it's hard to overpoint at conversation or
Well, and
dialogue.
I should just say that the work of assembling dialogues, just look how hard it was to assemble a dialogue in the past. Like you got to gather these people who were there. So what did they say, et cetera, and so forth. Like it was basically before this medium of the Zoom YouTube combination, which I will note is basically 10 years old and maybe younger. It is very new because even though video recording, of course, was before that, the average person didn't have high speed enough of the internet. They also didn't have Zoom. They didn't have the technology. This is very, very new. And it is allowing us to record dialogues without having to assemble them. And assembling dialogues was really freaking difficult. And basically, if people in the past did it, it were the people in the dialogues assembling it themselves, which then has ego and their own agenda. And, you know, if you can remember the dialogue really well, then how much attention were you lost in the flow? So it was very, very difficult. So the assembly of dialogue has kind of been the best we could do to replicate and show the centrality of dialogue in intellectual development. Well, now we can just freaking record it and show it. So it's a big deal. Because otherwise you have to assemble dialogue, you know, and gather people from all around. It's really, really difficult. So I think that's very important, that point you're bringing up.
It's so funny. I mean, in South Africa, our president Cyril Ramaphosa, there's been this drive. They were trying to set up a national dialogue. This was a couple weeks ago. A couple weeks ago, the um quote that they had for what this would cost was just was outrageous. Like when you think that you have this take that we are on right now, and this huge hoo-ha about setting up a national dialogue because dialogue's important. It was just a ridiculous political moment
Yeah.
that happened for us. And I mean, this 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 technology has meant that um, I've overheard something that you've said. It's deeply impacted a choice that I've made in my life. That's linked me into something you've created and written that provided it was a catalyst for deep catharsis around heartbreak. And now I can talk to you, Daniel, about
Yeah.
this heartbreak that I had, that this lady, oh, you know, like it's just really
Yeah.
good to be here. So
Absolutely.
the okay, yeah, I mean, so much weight in Esperanza is on the utterance. That's the setup. She can't say I love you
Yep.
to Artemio. And so it's the speech act.
Yep.
It's the speech act itself. So if I put that in parallel with the with my own narrative, with the specific heartbreak, it was exactly at this at this at this place, saying Jesus in the context of other people. The speech act, like can I say it? So I saw Michelle. I listened to what she posted on conviction, on the word itself, conviction. And it's how I've expressed this experience to others. I say I was convicted and I confessed in this uh, particular moment, this evening, in a prayer group of different of mothers. So the after that happened, it was, I mean, I was in the wake of what transpired, but it was in a different community to the home church that I'd been involved in. Um, a different ministry. So then that next weekend, I go with my partner at the time she was DJing at an event in the city about 2 hours away. So we went there and we stayed with her father. We went a day early and we watched Dune. At the second one, where the whole a lot of the weight in, I'm forgetting the main character's name, in his process is coming to accept onto himself this position of Messiah. And then the story flips when he's like, okay, now then he starts saying to everybody, he ignites that whole messianic anticipation by saying, yes, I am the Messiah. And then that changes the momentum. I think there's also a break in his romantic the romantic story in that.
Right.
So this was like this immediate contact with this pattern in an art form as I was in this question of this has transpired. I know in some way that coming to speech about this is going to mean certain losses or changes that I can't control. And also, like, I know that I'm going to be severely misunderstood when I take the position of internal to this identity, to Christian identity. And that the aversion to that was a big deterrent for a while. And it was cause for just kind of recognizing in some way the structure of this, I guess, both the death of God moment, as well as a big thing for me at that time was dialogos, or serving the living quality of speech in the context of the other. And for me, I felt like this was fulfilling this essentially Christian inheritance. So what need was there to confess? Like, what need was there to utter the word? But I mean, I ended up coming to that decision, and staying with it. That I do have notes down here about what you're saying there, but I feel like maybe, like, I don't know how to pause at this moment, but it's at that utterance, the consequence of it, this moment with the Dune movie, and this, of course, like, the situation with Jesus is Jesus was the one who said, I am the Messiah, took the weight of that messianic anticipation onto him, and it took him to the cross.
Yes.
So we aren't in a position where we say we're the Messiah. In fact, that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Like, the point is that Jesus emptied that messianic expectation. Right. This is why the Christian atheism thrust is so important.
Right.
Because to be in the Christian identity, which most people who are saying I am Christian are not realizing in every implicated big other that they're still, to use a hard language, serve.
Right.
So then the confession now is not I am Messiah, but it is something like I recognize that event. Maybe that's where my biggest question at the moment is. It's like, what is that? What is the importance of that utterance? I think that's, well, that's a big question. So
Well,
let me put it down there.
I think that's fantastic. The entire story, well, is about this. To what degree is utterance necessary or not? To what degree can you make up with utterance with dance? Because it's about this ballerina. A few more things. What's so interesting in the fiction story, because you could ask, like, why is it in Havana, Cuba? You have to do all this research, say, okay, I need a believable political tension that two characters are caught in, and one of them would have a believable alternative to speaking that would be plausible to the reader. Oh, there's a massive Havana ballet school. Oh, Cuba before we know the embargo is going to end, and you're looking for all of these different tensions. And oh, there's gang activity in Havana, but part of it is a liberation, et cetera, right? You're looking for all of these different places, and it all comes together in Havana, Cuba. But then you have a problem. You don't live in Havana, Cuba. You don't want to sound like you're coming in there and saying what it's like. So you have to learn the streets, read a bunch of books, go through, like look at images, like learn, and it's a lot of fun. But that also is, there's something about fiction that's not just the empathy of people, but almost the empathy of civilizations. Like, how do I think like this civilization, but do it in a manner that's not presumptuous and also acknowledges your own limits? Like, you can't actually think like the civilization, but how can you carve out a little slice here between these two characters that creates a believable situation? And then how do you make the aesthetic of Havana not just feel added on, like just as an add-on? How do you make it feel essential to the life of these characters? And that's always a lot of fun to work with. But on this idea, the question would be, I think we as humans want to believe words don't matter. Like, we want to believe words don't matter. And because then the tension of the utterance, the speech act, is removed from us. Like, oh, love doesn't have to be put into words. The story is asking that. Okay, let's see. Do we need words for love? Because there's always that idea is, I love you so much that words fail me. Is that precisely when love is proven or love is lost? You know, there's this idea that what is beyond words is better because it's beyond words. Maybe, maybe not. There's seemingly some truth to the failure of words. In fact, if your words never fail you, that seems problematic. But then it also seems problematic to just kind of claim my words are failing me or words are not appropriate here, right? There seems to be ditches on either side of the road, right? There's also questions of, when is Esperanza running and fleeing from speaking? When is she being wise? You know, her concerns about speaking and saying I love you are very valid. These ideas that then, she could be used as leverage against Artemio, that once people know this could be very problematic, there's this constant sort of explanation where she's also using story to indirectly tell Artemio her situation, right? And that's also very interesting. Well, an idea of that is how often when a reader reads fiction is the author doing something similar. Like, it's an indirect way of saying something that's currently going on in the person's life or in the world. And how often do we pick up on that? How often do we resonate with that? Do you have to say it directly? Is showing it enough to make people connect it with what's going on? Why or why not? When not? All of those kind of questions emerges, right? And there's this idea that in love, you should be able to communicate without words. You should be able to just be with one another without speaking. That's very, very true. But then there's a problem with being with someone you love and never speaking. You can sometimes see this in couple, where there's kind of the silence is not evidence of an intimacy. The silence is evidence of a fear of speaking or not knowing how to speak. Well, how do you tell the difference between qualities of silence? How do you identify those differences, right? Well, learning that sensitivity seems extremely important. And so the story is exploring all of those dynamics. And the reader has to ask, is Esperanza afraid? Is Esperanza wise? Is Esperanza genuine? Is Esperanza not? What is this idea? Why does she have this idea that I can't tell the person I love them? Like, why is this idea even there, right? And then as the story goes on, you start learning it. These are the reasons, but are they ad hoc? Are they just added later on? Are they things she wants to believe or that she genuinely believes? Does she even know? Does Esperanza even know? Well, I think those are the kind of questions that, if you're really taking seriously the speech act and its power and what it means, because once you speak, you can't unspeak. Once it is said, it can't be unsaid. If you take that seriously, then those kind of questions come to mind. I'll pause. There's more to say, but and it's funny, I guess you mean Geopetti, because obviously, if you take the song that Artemio is playing actually on the piano, if you go to the piano, you click those notes as dun 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 dun. It is that very track. And
Oh
Saudi
wow.
is, in fact, he brings up the composer who has relevance to the topic of the revolution and Che and et cetera, so forth. So, but I will pause
Wow.
there and then give it to you, sir.
I mean, that's yeah. That like that's, that kind of thing is fantastic, like that and through art, music, piano. I'm speaking of this specifically the last fact that you brought in there with Eric Satie
Mm.
and the playing. Um, this I mean, you really intensified the ambiguity of the ending for me in what you said now, so I really appreciate that as well. Um, that's good. That's good stuff. Um, I had in mind like the form that's chosen in the story to the art form that is meant to show and not tell is dance. And I mean, just an aside, it was a unique and wonderful experience to read the movement of a dance. To I don't think I've read that before. There was something um there was something really really good about that. I suppose like if you think about anatomy, like it's structured, it's lawful, it can't do some things, it can do some things, and you can sequence a kind of movement that can follow. But yeah, it was I really appreciated that aspect, and then this is also like along the side or periphery and just the general O.G. Rose aesthetic, which I know you're a photographer as well, or also I dig it. It's a signature. There is a signature, an O.G. Rose signature. I mean, under the wing is here just for reference. It's the feathers, eh?
Yes, sir.
Like yeah, and this brown as well is just yeah. It's ah
What? Well, it's
yeah.
funny. I'll just make some comments. I appreciate you noting the paragraph on the dance. It was funny. I woke up one morning at like 4:30 a.m. and had the kind of saw the story, and then went and that was the first paragraph. And that paragraph from 2013-14 was rewritten 30 or 40 times to find that kind of structure and to bring it together. Because there's an idea, the paragraph has to make the reader feel like something is successfully being shown. Like that there is success here that you can show and not tell, actually. Because there's something about but the odd move is I have to tell you the dance moves to show them. So how do I show not tell, right? Because I have to tell you the dance moves, but I have to do it in a way that makes you feel shown. So there is a delicacy there. This delicacy is the same delicacy as the speech act. If I
Yes.
tell it too soon, tell it in the wrong way, doesn't work. But if I don't speak at all, then there's also a problem, right? So this delicacy of knowing when to speak, how to speak, when you need to confess and make sacrifice, when not, when so, this is, for me, the phrase show don't tell. To take that is kind of a guide for life, if by that you mean show don't tell, but you must tell to show. Like show don't tell, but you must tell to show. Oh, that's the contradiction now. And actually, I think that's the truth of fiction. And ultimately, that is what the story is pointing to, not to claim it either does or doesn't. The hope is that it is suggesting the fiction advice of show don't tell is like show don't tell, but you must tell to show. Okay, well, that sounds like I'm screwed. Well, good luck. And that's also part of, I think, love. I think love is this. Show don't tell. Don't just tell the person you love them. Show them. Oh, but you must tell to show. Like there must be some telling so that if you show them, because here's also the question. How should Artemio even think that the dance means that Esperanza loves him? Like, why would you even have that framework unless he knew that, right? Like, where would that idea, you would have to be told, I love you, and then you could see the dance as showing that, right? How can you get the framework to interpret the dance from just the dance, right? Well, that seems like an impossible bridge to cross, right? And yet, there's something very important about trying. There's something very, very important about the very effort. That actually, the effort seems to be love, actually. The very effort seems to be tied to the love act. But does this mean love is love because it fails? Seemingly. It's seemingly tied to that, absolutely. So those questions, and also too, I will note, another hope of fiction, and not that I'm saying this as, success or not, just how I think about it. A hope of fiction is that ambiguity grows on the reread. You should not, in the first read of fiction, so this is just why I'm talking about methodology for those interested. The story should not be ambiguous on the first read. It should have a clear emotional crescendo. It's the ambiguity should arise secondarily because that's when it becomes a space of discussion. When the ambiguity kind of grows, now you have a field of discussion. And that's also the tension. You'll have art that succeeds in an emotional hit, but then it doesn't have ambiguity on the reread, so you get the emotional hit and you move on, right? You've got to have, in my opinion, the both. And one of the great mistakes of some modern, postmodern, and some forms of literature is it sacrificed the emotional crescendo for the complexity and the ambiguity, maybe in a Bart or some parts of Pitchin and et cetera, so forth. Not The Crying of Lot 49. I think that's a masterpiece. But that then made books feel like puzzles you had to solve, right? Oh, I read this and it's like a puzzle and I don't understand it, but that just means I'm stupid and the author has some kind of secret message to kind of bring out and whatever. I think this killed literature. I think literature has, but then the reaction against that was, screw that, we're just going to talk about personal relationships and make it an emotional undertaking. But that was problematic because then you don't have a space of an unfolding of the reader as they consider the work from different angles, right? So I think art, and in general, I think art has to have a emotional crescendo, which means it does not feel ambiguous on the first go, to the degree that it hurts the emotional development. But then on the reread, the space of ambiguity opens up because of certain details here and there. But then the details that do this, and I won't go any more into the process of fiction, right? The details that open up the ambiguity have to basically be read over the first time in a manner that makes them insignificant, where you just kind of read them, you don't think much of them, but then when you go back again, you go, wait a minute, hold on, and then you think about them, and that starts unlocking things in other ways to create a field of ambiguity from discussion. And one of the great literary scholars on ambiguity is William Epson. He wrote a book called 7 Forms of Ambiguity. I think we don't know what ambiguity is. We think ambiguity is unclear. It is a lack of clarity. Ambiguity is more of a space of either or. It's more Kierkegaardian. It's more of a kind of either or that requires a certain leap of faith, dare I say, or maybe even an absolute choice, that kind of opens the field of thinking things. But no, I'll give it to you. The tension of understanding that the speech act matters, but we kind of want to believe it doesn't, and how, because then we don't have to worry about it. This is so much of what the story wants to kind of think through and consider. And then, of course, the name Esperanza is it means hope. So what is the hope of Esperanza in the story? What is he hoping in? Is he hoping in the ability to communicate without speech? Well, that could work. Dance is communication. Is she using hope to run? Because hope can be used to run. Artemio alludes to this. So what is the characteristic of hope in the story is also tied to the speech act, I think. But I'll pause and give it back.
That was so rich, Daniel. The dance of hope, Esperanza. Yeah, and that this so telling the sequence shows the dance. I mean that you're unfolding that or expanding that for me was really appreciated because it had really struck me and I hadn't come to the articulation of why that might be so. Because it bookends the story. The dance of hope. Wow. Okay. I mean, I know you stopped yourself short in terms of like the practicalities and the technicalities, but one curiosity is when you crafting something as you've crafted here with intense care and effort and thought, how do you experience it like the first read, so that I mean, maybe I'll give you that immediately.
That's an excellent question. I do think this is one of the reasons. So Esperanza was longer, then you cut, then you say there's nothing more to cut, and then you cut, then you say there's nothing more to cut, then you cut, and you say, oh, I need to add something, and then you add, and you add, and you cut, and you're doing this a lot. I think also there's like this story is 2000, I believe the first version is 2014. I think there is something about, in my opinion, there is something about fiction that it takes a long time. And one of the reasons it takes a long time is because you have to actually let time pass to recover the ability to read it for the first time. Like you have to like work it really intensely and then put it away for 2 to 3 years. And then come back to it and you're going to see that it's bad. And then you'll be able to redo it and see that it's bad. And there's also something interesting about identifying when the story is right. This is very odd because by definition, when you finish it, you think it's right. You have to somehow learn, there's some sort of appreciation of your own inability to identify when something is right. That also is very, very important. You also really have to you have to decide what is the most important thing for the story. Like, what is the most important thing? Is it the meaning? Is it the mystery? Is it the puzzle? Is it the characters? Is it the setting? Like, is it the writing? What is the most important thing for you? I am strongly of the opinion that the number one thing should be the emotional impact. It should absolutely be the emotional impact, because to do that correctly will entail language, character, setting, ideas, etc., so forth. And also the emotional impact cannot be lost on the reread or lost at the end. It has to be held. It changes and it transforms. But if there's a loss of appreciation or a loss of relationship, that's also very problematic. So how do you do that? There comes a point where the characters feel like people. Like that they're not yours, actually. It's a really weird thing. You created Esperanza, but you didn't. It has to feel like you didn't. Once that occurs, the possibility of emotional impact comes on because you as the writer can be emotionally impacted by these characters. That is the key. When the story gets to the place where you are moved by the characters, like they've come to be their own people in such a way that their very situation is moving to you. Because that's when it doesn't feel like it's just something you created. It feels like it is realized more than just created. And if it has that sort of like where Esperanza is a person who you care about, and Artemio is a person you care about, and you care about the relationship, and you don't even think about it as something you created. Like when you get to the point where you don't even relate to the story anymore as something you came up with, that tends to be a very good sign that the story has preserved the emotional impact. That it is actually preserved it. And if you yourself, as the author, find yourself thinking about the story and coming back to the story and looking at it from different angles and actually thinking through different things in different ways, and yet your love of the characters or their situation or the move you feel in considering the tragedy, if that's still preserved, then the work works, right? If that is not there, you should wait. You should come back to it. Children grow. Artistic creations are similar. They grow, they mature, they develop. And I think fiction is a multi-decade process. I think it is precisely in the same way that children growing is a multi-decade process. There's something about fiction that is very similar. Now, critically, that doesn't mean you're not working on writing every day. You absolutely are, because if you're not, then as the characters mature, you will prove unworthy to articulate them in their development. So you have to be working every day to be able to actually honor the work as it ages and grows and comes into itself. But you have to be working not with an expectation of the timing, not with a kind of expectation as when going to be, because children are their own people. So there's a fine balance there, but I would say just the critical, and then I'll give it to you, the critical characteristic is when you yourself are emotionally moved. Like when you yourself, like you should, when you come up with when the idea appears and you see where the story is going, like the very ending, you should be, as the writer, shook. Like you as the writer should be moved. Like, oh my gosh, like, and that is why you write it. Like you've had a apprehension of an emotional experience or a situation that two characters get in that moves you. Like if you don't have that to begin, it's a question of why you would write it in the beginning at all, right? Like why are you writing at all? So for me, it starts with that bam. The same happened with Blackout, Turn the World, Hero. I could go on, and then you're articulating that, and then the second step is that you yourself, when you remember the work, you think about the work, you still have that experience. You still see these as people who are caught in a tragedy. Well, I guess I want to say this. It feels like the story is not something you created, but a description of just how reality is. Like this is how reality is. It is caught in theo-political tensions that bring people to absolute choices that love is caught in the middle of. This is how the world works, actually. And that's one of the ways that you as the writer can continue to be moved by it, because it doesn't just feel like something nifty you came up with. It feels like an unveiling of how reality actually works. And that's why you as the creator can also be emotionally moved by it, because it's not just something you came up with that's neat or clever. It's like, no, this is actually how reality is. So that to me, those are some of the characteristics I find very important.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, what a privilege to have like an inside track to hear you express your thoughts on the creative process, and I mean just the fact that you think about the creative process in decades long terms
Yeah.
is is remarkably unique today, perhaps, because we just don't occupy these kinds of time frames unless the material itself demands that you
Yes.
do.
Yes.
You can't do it in any other way.
Yes.
And this kind of thing you have to almost fail at and fall into and almost come to it by apparently mistaken that this thing has remained with you. It's hard to keep yeah, a commitment. A project has to somehow do this. You use the phrasing kind of self-forgetting, or you
Yeah.
are forgetting yourself in relation to
Yes.
it, but it persists and you return to it. And I mean, your response to my question about the returning to the work as if for the first time, it was time. The
Yes.
time does this. That the time, and I think there's probably a mirror or an analog of that in terms of love, friendship, family.
Yes.
I mean, like if you think about just the immediate you can't substitute a history with a person. You can't
No.
substitute that you've had a shared history. It's just you can't, because the time that passes. When you utter a word, you've uttered the word. It's now inscribed. It's a daunting. Okay, I have yeah.
Well, I mean, not to jump in, I'll roll in. Is that history? If history proves that the thing is alive, like you have a history with something that is alive or that is relational with you. If you create a work that doesn't feel like it has a history, it feels like technique and it works. But if you relate to your work, you say it works, it's a good story, right? There's actually something problematic with that. Because then it just sounds like it's an engine that works. I don't tend to think about like having histories with appliances. I tend to think about having histories with people. And why do we even talk about the history? Is because the history matters because there was something contingent that became determined. Like it was contingent that we meet, it was contingent that we talk, but we have a history, we have a ledger, we have evidence that the contingency congealed into a determination, right? So history and this movement of contingency into determination is strongly tied together, right? That is how a work of art should feel to the creator. It should feel like a contingency, then moves into a determination, then makes it be a person, that makes it alive. You have a history with Esperanza. That means you have a relationship. That means it is, yeah, Esperanza could have blonde hair instead of black, etc., so forth, right? But actually, no. That's what happens. Nope, it had to be that way. like it moves from contingency to necessity because Esperanza has long black hair. That is how she is, and it could have been no other way, etc. Now I can go into detail on that why, but there's this feeling of no, this is Esperanza. It's not up to me to change her. This is who they are, right? That feeling of a contingency becoming a necessity and relating to it as a history. That's also just so important because then, like, when I think about characters like Eve, the mom and Help, when I think about Esperanza, Mary Rose, etc., so forth, it doesn't feel to me like they're done or finished. They feel like they're out there somewhere, still living. They're out there in their story, still going on, right? Because if they have a history, then they have a history. It's still going. The past, what did Faulkner say? The past isn't over. It's not even past. I always like that line. This idea that that which has a history is alive. And if I have a history with these people, why would I think they're not still alive, right? Like just somewhere. Somewhere in the way is say, well, that sounds kind of weird. Well, if you believe, if the fiction works, and then I'll give it back to you. If the fiction works, which for me means that it properly shows something true about reality, and if it's showing something true about reality and only literature can show it, it's going to be dealing something about ontological trade-offs or an ontological space that opens up that requires absolute choice. If that is in fact the case of reality, then it is alive. Those characters are out there. They're in the conditions of possibility that are our world. And there are people participating in those kind of stories. So it's very much going on. And we are in the reality that can arise to these situations of, say, a character believing that if I say I love you, the love is gone. In these conditions of a character like Mary Rose trying to hold a farm together in light of the modern world and new ideas of right and wrong. Like all these kind of characters, this is in the conditions of reality. And so it is out there. And so it doesn't feel like the works are done. They feel like they're still being participated in. And so I think that's also an important quality. And I think the same should be felt of your philosophy. Like if you're doing philosophical work, it should feel like people are doing it right now because they're living in a world where this philosophy properly describes what is the case. And so it should feel like the philosophy that you're doing is something that people are out there doing right now. Otherwise, it's just a technical expression. It's not that with a history that is getting at the relational qualities of people's lives themselves. But I'll pause and give it back to you, Daniel.
Oh, fantastic. So on that thread there, you've used the language apprehension or the general question would be something around, I'm curious about your posture or your internal posture to the work, or to what you've used the words as like unveiling or seeking, and in what you've expressed now, there's this way in which the work and the characters themselves, the reality to them. So in terms of your drive, like this, does it want to reflect? And I guess the broader question that it's in would be like, how much is reality, conformity with reality, contact, there would be lots to say around there. How much is that, how much is it necessary? How much is creativity necessary to that? As I express the question, it almost like collapses on itself, but like, how much is the creative act part of this coming into contact? And then there's the product that, or like the outcome or the product, like the final form of the story, that also it seems to it's a solid existing thing, but the more that it becomes something, the more it kind of drops away into something real. So there's this like oscillating between the static product, the good that is the end of the process, but it's being an end that you are aiming for, is it's kind of like blurring a bit with real, like you wanting it to have this continuing quality. I mean, I've been stumbling a bit now as I'm speaking, because it's a super mysterious quality, this, and just linking this to the language of like the the shorthand that I use for like the love makes of contingency necessity. So
Right.
it's this like this decision of something that was contingent, and then it becomes necessary, and time is important to that process. But then in maybe like slightly peripheral instances with the things that gather around us in our lives, that that are they persist in their presence. They confer this sense of otherness and of life because they persist regardless of whether we are attending to or even cultivating or even feeding them. But they return. And there's unique things in each of our lives that have this kind of quality, and they reveal themselves through this process of time. Um, I mean, for this is this and on an in an individual sense, I think this is a reality, and then this is also a historical societal case. Things persist, and the I mean, I'm going to link some more narrative in now. Is the I went to the funeral of my godfather, and there was this there was this silent conspiracy in the room. Now, this very expressive language that will give the sense of like maybe almost something psychotic in terms of how I'm reading stuff. But the way that silence tends to operate in terms of it's a very general agreement to not give voice to something, but there's an agreement about there being something there. So the recognition of that and the giving voice to it, the one who gives the voice, it can be like it's a that can be the what gives rise to like a scapegoating mechanism or something, or if you have the the guts to say the thing, now you're responsible for saying the thing. So it's probably
Mm-hmm.
why it's probably the downward pressure for why the it becomes this conspiracy of silence. Um, so the the fact that I was there, I was now finding myself in a relationship of responsibility to that. So I'm being called to respond to it, but
Right.
I didn't know what to do. What I ended up doing was not skillful. It was messy. But I did something. I marked the moment. I marked the fact that I was responding to something, but I could have done it a lot, a lot more skillfully. The consequence of that was my uncle, who has been interested in my faith through my life, and another Christian couple had approached me to the side, and they wanted to know what spirits I was engaging, because they had seen me use my voice, they had seen me act in a public space contrary to expectation and in a disruptive way. And so there was this a recognition, but also like a wanting to assess me almost. Like the idea would be, what spirits are you entertaining, such that like what's compelling you to speak? Why are you speaking? On behalf of who are you speaking? Um, and then my uncle gave me a book, and I read it out of uh, respect for him,
Sure.
and it was Watchman Nee, the
Ah,
spiritual man.
yeah, Watchmen. Mm-hmm.
And I think it took me about a year and a bit to move through that. I read the I read the first bit. Um, I started enacting, asking to be searched, what in me is not in conformity, and then things uh, moved in my life. And this first almost coming to speech, but I saw that like if I do that, this relationship will break. I'm gonna have to move there. So I just thought a bit I can put it down for a while. But that ended up in a second moment where I came to the point where I couldn't not in my estimation. Um, so there's this is I guess I say that to gesture to the fact that this participating with reality and history, it leaves certain artifacts that persist amongst us, that we are in relationship to, that have a call on us, that situate us and define us, apart from what we would say or like or think. And then this, I guess, the creative act that is one's life is a movement that is in relationship with your actual inheritance,
Yeah.
with what you inherit as what persists around you.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me put it, pass it back there.
Well, you're getting at very important things. So to start, one of the things that I really will talk a lot about that I think is very important is the phenomenology of the artist, like the experience of the creative act itself, not simply the creative product, but the experience of making art. And this phenomena, and then of course, phenomenology is not merely asking you about experiences. It says, if you can have X experience, what must reality be like to afford X experience, right? What must be the case? What must be the conditions of possibility? Well, so to start, there is for me a very real sense in which you don't begin thinking unless you take seriously the phenomenology of the artist. And the reason why I say that is because you learn it is possible to think without knowing the outcome. You learn it is possible to think when you don't know what to do, when you don't have understanding, when you have, it's not chaos, it's not that you know nothing, but you go in and figure out as you go, right? That quality is, I think, a key. You could make a distinction almost between creating and making. Making is when you have the blueprint, you know what the building is supposed to look like, and you follow the steps, right? It seems like creation, but it's actually different because you have it all mapped out, and then you build it, maybe like an engineer or a building, or even a story. There are people who do a hard storyboard, and then they write the story or they write the movie, and it moves to a kind of making structure. Now, maybe there's creativity in generating the blueprint, that you didn't know, and then you make the blueprint, but there's a transition where there is some sort of distinction where making knows the end, creativity doesn't know the end. Making occurs primarily in a space of understanding, we could say. Creativity primarily operates in a place of not understanding. Well, the reaction would be like, well, if you don't understand, there's no intelligibility, there's no knowledge, there's nothing there. Creativity unveils to you the possibility of having intelligibility and actual meaningful thought in a space of not knowing. This is massive. The reason why it is massive is because it suggests that the one world is actually there. That if you're able to operate meaningfully without really knowing everything that's going on, then there's a sense that there must be a reality supporting you. There must be a reality that's even giving you things along the way. Like when you go to write a story, you'll have an idea, as if it just appeared, right? The creative act unveils the intimate relationship between creating and surprise. And the issue is, if there's no surprise in your thinking, then there's a sense in which there is no thinking, just following. You're just kind of following how one thing leads to the next. Thinking and improvisation are tied together, but improvisation is not random. It's the ability, it's more of a, got it, received. I put myself in, here it is, bam, next step, go, boom, 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 like this movement of unfolding without knowing the outcome ahead of time. I do think there is something about this experience that if you never have, there is a lack of development that occurs that is very severe. So for example, I was speaking with Aspasi and Seth, who I love, and one of the things we talked about is how most people have probably never had a conversation. Another reason why this technology is a big deal is because it actually shows people what conversation is. And most people, this sounds extreme, I do think most people have never had a conversation, because most people don't know how to talk about something if they don't know where the conversation is going or why they're talking, right? And that's why most people's conversations is small talk. Because if I ask you, what'd you do today? I kind of know generally what you're going to say. I have a sense of the fitting answer. I know I'm supposed to ask you about work. I know I'm supposed to ask you about X, Y, and Z. So there's a kind of predictability. I'll call them script. There's a certain script in the structure by which people interact. And most people's interactions are, in this sense, scripted. They have a certain, okay, that's that line, that's line. Most people's The political debates are scripted. Oh, you're pro-life. Oh, that means I'm pro-choice. And what about incest? Like there's a kind of board game. Bernard Hankins would always say, it's almost, oh, we're going to talk about this political issue. Let me get the board off the shelf. Okay, here's the rules. And there's kind of predictable positions and predictable arguments. And it's all very scripted, right? The idea that there's an alternative of interaction to this is very hard to believe if you have not experienced creativity yourself. If you've not gone into these spaces of not knowing, right? There's also really good reason not to go into those spaces, because whatever happens becomes part of your history. And if you don't know what you're doing, it could really be bad, right? Because the space of the unknown risks the real, right? So it's also for good reason. Here's another issue. It's also for good reason the symbolic is constructed to keep out the unknown. Like the symbolic, for very good reason, if we're thinking Lacan, and by symbolic just thinking generally the social order, it's really for good reason. The social order has kind of othered creativity in favor of, say, just making. It's othered it because if people get it wrong, or they're not skillful, or there are consequences, you have a history. That doesn't mean you can't recover, but it increases unpredictability and potential chaos that could have black swan consequence, right? So the social order is like, well, let's actually just train people in favor of scriptedness because that seems safer, right? And that is reasonable unless you get to a historic moment where that is no longer sufficient because you need to negate sublate into absolute knowing from religion to allude to real speculations in Cadell's work. And I won't get into all that here, but there is very good reason to believe that our historic moment requires the negation sublation to something that is more creative. To make it very, very simple, if increasingly the average person's day will be defined by an encounter with otherness, the alien, global pluralism, then the creative disposition is huge, because that's the kind of mode by which you can encounter otherness and roll with it. You can go with it, to put it very, very generally. If you don't have that ability and you've been habituated and reliant on scripts, when stuff doesn't fit the script, you'll break. So to just allude to that, because I do think our historic movement requires movement into creativity. And I do think there's something about creativity that is going to make you think about thinking differently. And if you never think about thinking, you're trapped in whatever enclosure thinking presents you with, and that's going to be AA. And that will have its consequence. There is something, though, very interesting, where what you see in creativity is the making a contingency of determination. And I like also what you were saying about this feeling of a silence that needs to be spoken to, this notion that it's there, and having the courage to speak to it. There's also something to be said that no matter how unskillfully something is done, if there was courage to express, there's a redemptive kernel in it. Because courage, that can't be taken, right? Now, there can be an insecurity to cover the courage and to make up, and then you take off responsibility. But if you act in courage and then stand in it and face the consequence, that makes space for grace and making things new. But this idea of a certain silence of when to speak or not, and this idea that once you speak, you can't unspeak. Well, this again is the stakes of Esperanza. Once you speak, you can't unspeak. It cannot be undone. And Esperanza is like, well, here's really good reasons not to speak, without saying directly he's talking about them, right? Because once it happens, it can't be undone. Though that is very, very serious, because speaking is always a contingency moved into determination. I could say many things, but now that I say this, I can't not say this. So it is the motion of freedom. Like, I really connect speaking and freedom, because speaking is the motion of freedom. It is contingent, now determined. Instantaneous contingency determination, just like that. And that's the stakes of being human, that you have the ability at every moment to generate a process of contingency, now determination, just like that. That is incredible power. And that contingency is not reducible to the moment that came before. If two billiard balls hit one another, I can say, well, it's not really contingent, because it's natural law that the ball would move this way, and etc. So there are no natural laws for speaking. Like, there are no natural laws where the word I must be followed by the word cat or something, right? Like, words can be structured in an infinite number of ways. And even if there was some deterministic reason that incentivized me to start speaking, the sequence of the speaking is contingent. And if one wants to posit that it's not, I would need to see that evidence. And, so that's speaking. And, well, even if somehow your speaking is determination, Your speaking relative to me is not. And so I have contingency there in the between space. So there's a contingency that is being turned into determinism every single moment. And in fact, for me, one of the great evidences and proofs of freedom is that if I can say something to you that you don't want to hear, and once I say it, you feel that you lost something. You feel this loss of freedom. Like if I say, do you want to go to the movies, and you don't, you feel the loss of freedom because now you have to risk pissing me off. You're like, oh, well, maybe tomorrow. Like you feel this nervousness, right? Well, what did you lose? What did you lose between the moment of me saying, do you want to go to the movies? Not saying that and then saying it. You lost freedom. So you feel the loss of freedom. It's hard to feel the presence of freedom, but the loss of it is easy to feel. And if you're feeling that, what was that? Well, that must have been present to lose it, right? So speaking is this perpetual experience of the movement of freedom into determination, right? And of course, then if we're bad at speaking, then we have no mastery of the movement of contingency to determination, which is freedom. Freedom is not pure contingency, it's the movement of contingency into determination. And if you can't speak and you can't articulate and you don't do the creative act, then you actually have no familiarity with freedom as the movement of contingency to determination. So if you never create, you never speak, then the word freedom cannot be an emotional word. It can't be it can't be a word you really feel because you've never participated in the movement of contingency to determination, which is freedom. I think some more things, and I'll give it to you. I think maturity is strongly tied to coming to terms and accepting that we as human beings are defined by this movement of contingency to determination, and to work to be more, to work to not be afraid of it, to work to be able to do it well, to work to be skilled in it, to learn the intricacies of it. There's something about maturity, that seems tied to responsibility. Well, a responsibility I don't think we emphasize enough is responsibility for the movement of contingency to determination. That is characterized primarily by the speech act. Maturity is where you own this responsibility and you try to get good at it. But it's really hard to get good at it because the only way you get better at it is to do it. And if you're doing it, that means you're in the thing, like Hegel in the Science of Logic book. You're in the river, you're in the thing, which means you're in the place to mess up. The only way to get better at this thing is to be in the place to mess up. That's not fun, but that's literally what maturity requires. Maturity, in my opinion, requires being in the thing that you need to get better at, which means you're going to mess it up. We tend to define maturity as the avoiding of mistake. The suggestion here is maturity is found in the making of mistake. The question is how to make it in a manner that is not so devastating. It destroys all your relationships. It destroys your career. Like how to make mistakes well. And to plan your mistakes well, per se, to structure them in a manner where you can fail a lot. And that sounds odd, but honestly, the entrepreneur does that. A good entrepreneur works in a manner to make sure there's no failure that takes them out of the game, that they're able to keep failing. Because if you can keep failing, that means you're still in the game, right? Good investors do the same thing. They don't make an investment that wipes them out. They know they're going to lose money, but they do it in a manner by managing the risk to make sure that they never get wiped out, right? Well, I think human beings need to do the exact same thing. Like you go, okay, the only way to mature is to do that which I have to get good at, which by definition means I'm going to make mistakes. Just probabilistically, I'll make mistakes. So how do I make those mistakes in a manner that isn't fatal or doesn't wipe me out of the game? Well, that's where the architecture comes in. That's where the design comes in. That's where the thinking, that's where the architecture comes in. And I'll close and then give it to you. This is, though, how I think about this is tied to story writing, though, because when you write a story, you write it in a manner that has space for the direction the characters go in. Like you write it in a manner where you're making a space where you have an idea of where things are going. You have a kind of structure, but then if the characters do something different, you can go that way, right? You have flexibility where if you write the story in a manner where everything has to line up, then if the characters want to go a different way, you fail. The whole thing's wiped out. It's like investing too much in it. But if you write it in a way where you can follow the characters, well, then you can be in the thing and designing it, and then in the rewrite, restructure it, redo things. And that habit, like, Esperanza surprised me on different points. To Turn the World surprised me, but then it was like, perfect. That surprise occurred because of the structure. And then it was like, that's it. That's where it was going. And that also that element of surprise feels like you were actually doing real work. And that's a point, I should say that, is when you do thinking that doesn't know what it's thinking, that appears in the act, then it feels like real thinking because something appeared you didn't plan. It's hard to feel like your thinking was real thinking if nothing emerges in it that wasn't planned. Similarly, it's hard to feel like your creative work actually created something if something doesn't emerge that surprises you. So, surprise is confirmation, oddly. But we actually tend to associate surprise with mistake. If something happens you didn't expect, that means you're stupid. If something happened that you didn't design it well enough. No, we want to design to surprise. We want to develop ourselves as subjects for surprise because the surprise is the confirmation. And the surprise, though, that is the confirmation, is going to be found in the movement of contingency to determination, which means sometimes the surprise will be an error, sometimes it will be something not going well, but that's not evidence you shouldn't have done that. That's not evidence that it's the wrong methodology. It means that this is just the process that has to, through history, develop and become more skillful and think through. But that's again why Hegel says, the fear of error is the fear of truth. There's more to say, but I'll stop and I will give it to you.
Brilliant again. I mean, I appreciate you bringing in Cadell and specifically on that thread of free speech and coming to speech and building spaces for coming to speech and failing in that coming to speech. Yes, that's the important work today. That's happening there. And I mean, a surprise for me in this conversation was including the Parmenides, but it's proven good that I did because in that dialogue again, when Parmenides starts speaking directly with Socrates and he's speaking about what Socrates should do now, that philosophy has, he's speaking about it. I always struggle to express this. It hasn't quite grasped him. It has grasped him, but he needs to do something. He needs to train. So then he points to training, and Parmenides is like, you need to do the thing that most people will say is idle talk. But you need to go, Socrates, and talk, like to talk idly. And then the rest of the dialogue perhaps gives a little bit more, or at least just an example of the things to be spoken about. They end up getting into that process where they speak about the one, if it is, if it isn't, and the consequences of that. But it's definitely noting there that like that's the Platonic dialogue from however many years ago, and the advice given is idle talk. This place of speech with the other, and coming to speech, failing in that act of coming to speech and doing it. And here we are, the recorded process of it. Another can eavesdrop, another can be compelled into or inspired to try to say that thing and take the confirmation that like if I can't quite say it, or if I'm struggling to say it, it's probably the right space where I'm trying to speak the thing. And in the context of family, that's incredibly difficult and important. But another feature of the take that this conversation is on the screen with me. It's on the device, and I'm carrying it through my life, and it informs. There's a way in which that is really great. I think I'm forgetting the exact content, but my family was sitting around and they're watching TV, and I think I had just listened to a conversation that you had. I'm forgetting the exact context from it. My sound is all good, eh?
Yeah, I just heard you.
Yeah.
No problem.
Okay. It immediately prompted introducing an idea into that space of speech with the family. It was like a continuation of the conversation that had just happened on the screen. And then so the conversation from the screen just fractured into, say, flesh or context of the family. And the more and more I can kind of weave this kind of thing, the more I consider whatever I'm doing to be worthwhile and important. And it gives this quality of I guess you used the word cipher. Like it's this well, in the greater sense, a great conversation. And to the degree that any speaking being participates in the conversation that is ongoing, is then the great conversation gives to everyone a great invitation.
Absolutely.
That these matters of love, of justice, of the good, which we have to engage negativity in order to realize, are ours to know. And this is, I think, a deep Platonic point for me. We implicate ourselves in our ideas of these notions of what it means to be good, of who a friend is, of what I think justice is. And then if we bastardize the notion of free speech, like it's just being able to say my scripted, semi-provocative idea on this particular issue, that's going to ignite the saying of the opposite idea from the other, then that's not the kind of free speech that's being spoken about. I want to the it gets also fold Dimitri's been running this reading group on Philosophy Portal, A Voice and Nothing More. And this experience in that funeral was, I mean, what I managed to do was shout. I just shouted. And there was courage in that, and I've stood by that event. But I know that I could have been more skillful in trying to address the thing, but I didn't have the skills at the time. So the only thing I could do was shout. The only thing I could say was something like, "There are tears that are due." But my uncle, who was standing right next to me, he just says the voice was just stuck in my throat. It wouldn't come out. He doesn't remember that utterance. That was the movement that essentially led to the conviction and the confession in the church in Greyton, because then confronted with now the family and social body who's asking something from me, who's checking me, what am I giving voice to? And I then entered a long process of examination. Well, what is it that I'm speaking out? And what would I stand by? What would I stand by speaking out? Because this is what she brought up in terms of in the process of speech, and also seeing history in this way of this movement from contingency into determination. That's terrifying.
Yep.
Like that freedom is it's terrifying. So there's something that can be a paralyzing, or I get you brought it out a bit by saying, like, I think it's the case that we are already to different degrees paralyzed by that fear, to the degree that our speech is impeded with one another in family. The reason might be, or an account for the reason, is that the fact of the freedom that we actually have, we have a fear on top of that, and so we don't realize, or we don't claim, or we don't enact that freedom,
Right.
because it's scary, and it can be dangerous for the exact reasons that you're saying. The issues of madness, as you come to be determined by your own speech and not the others, you lose the canopy, or the safety, or the boundary that the other gives you, however that other is conceived. The other to whom you will make sense, the other that makes sense to you, and to lose that coordinate is scary, because when you start to move differently in that kind of attribution, madness is your friend, or madness is what you are porting, and it can go wrong, and it does go wrong. There's a particular, I really appreciated your fleshing out how you're understanding the importance of creative experience. the experience of creativity in terms of the broader theoretical and conceptual work linking into Cadell. And I mean, pinning right at the beginning of this conversation, that conversation that you had recently with Cadell on the map is indestructible, the Substack that Cadell did on that, and then obviously the work itself, the book itself. I mean, could pin again, could put it in the description. It's really, really worthwhile. It's like this in the studying that I've done in Buddhist meditation spaces, they speak about dharma, like lawfulness, as when they see that lawfulness has taken hold in someone, when it induces this quality of just wanting to share it, of like just wanting to speak about it. So like someone will come to do this process, and then they'll go home and they can't help but say to their family members, like, you should really check this out. Like, come and look, come and see. Like, and this is the dilemma of having seen something, is what do I do with it now? And what do I do with it now in relation to my loved ones and my life, in relation to my life? And then the artwork as this work that it is that which requires that you respond to it in some way. And you will work out like the practicalities of what that response means. And that's what Esperanza meant to me. It's this, I have to, and because we have this means, I can contact you and we can speak about it in this way. So that's this I don't know, is sound coming through?
Yep. Oh yeah.
Okay. Temperamental mics. The a question relating to Esperanza. I'm just wondering, I'm not sure if it's probably, yeah, the role of orphans, that Esperanza and Artemio were orphans. I guess I'm wondering about that.
All of that is fantastic. I think, again, that idea of speech compelling you to speak, that's another interesting determination that emerges in speech. Like you gotta tell, like, I saw this. And so, because that's another complexity to show, don't tell. Like, if you were seeing something, you're gonna want to tell it. So there's a deeper relationship to these things. But then, can you tell it? Like, how do you tell it, right? Well, on that idea of like, how do you share something with your family? How do you like bring things to speech with the family? One of the roles of art and religion is the ability to indirectly speak to the family. Because if it's the art of speaking is the art of directness and indirectness with the in parentheses. If you're too direct too quickly, it's Lovecraft, it overwhelms them. But if you're not direct enough, they don't get it. It's ambiguous. It's actually very similar to the problem of the hiddenness of God. If God is too hidden, you can't find him. But if he's not hidden at all, you're destroyed because you're overwhelmed. So God has to be rightly hidden in the right way, as Dante and Pascal will talk a lot, and Ross Bird will talk about. That's really, really important. The speech act is the hiddenness of God problem, because we ourselves entail a certain apophatic quality that you're trying to bring out in the right way. What art can do is introduce a third, where you share art with your family that entails these ideas, and it allows a gradual moving toward new ideas because you can speak about it. And what did you think about it? So it creates an orbiting structure, possibly, which then allows to move in slowly to the core ideas that, because you did the work of moving into it, that can unlock the ability of the other people to then talk about some of these topics or to explore these different things, right? But the problem is, if we have a culture that doesn't train people on how to engage in arts, the effectiveness of this means goes down, right? But traditionally speaking, art was a means of bringing people into the place where they can discuss these things with their families. Religions have done this, because if the pastor is up there telling a sermon on the parables have done this, and everyone's going to church, it introduces a third to the two people in the familiar relationship that lets them get to each other indirectly on stuff that needs to be brought to speech until gradually they can be more direct. So it creates training, right? So churches did this, art did this, philosophy can do this. But learning the skillfulness of unveiling with the UN in parentheses. This is a lot of what this is. And there's a certain skill of unveiling that is not a system. It's more like cooking. You got to be able to read the room. You got to be able to tell what's going on. And as society has lost culture, religion, philosophy, and all these things, it's lost ways of unveiling with the UN in parentheses. And as a result, we're stuck in ourselves because we don't know, we don't have a means to get out of ourselves without it being too painful too quickly or too much too quickly. And this becomes a problem. But again, this technology and allowing overheard conversation, that is introducing a means of dealing with this problem. And the fact that family can watch different content, like they can overhear things. If you feel like there's a part of you that you need to bring your family into alignment with, the fact that you have some overheard conversations available online that they can overhear per se, can actually be a means of slowly on their own time bringing them to the space where they understand that part of you. Because if you have to directly tell them, then they can feel they have to respond. An overheard conversation, they can hear it and dwell on it. They don't have to immediately respond. And so that space is a big deal, because even if someone says, okay, I'm going to need some time to process that, even just saying that in the presence of the other person can be awkward and difficult, right? But if they could just overhear it on their time, this is very important. So it's very important that society creates means of a third, per se, by which people can then gradually bring the third in between them, right? People who are trained in philosophy have gotten to the place where they can bring the third between them, right? But not necessarily everyone is there, and that's fine, because those people are doing other roles in society that the philosopher may not, and it's all part of the ecosystem. But if you're in an age that increasingly needs capacities of creativity and philosophy and absolute knowing, then it will be important to more and more people to the place where the third can be between them, which can be the mystery of the unfolding itself, the creative act of the dialogue itself, the apathetic itself, but that has to be brought between. But there's something about art, religion, philosophy that can be the training wheels, per se, to bringing it there, right? But then I don't mean to say it's just training wheels as if propaganda, because I would argue if you yourself as a philosopher or thinker don't make art, then the revelation of what thinking is never unveiled to you. Like there's a truth in art that never comes out without it. So it has this double rule as well. Like having to think through theological quandaries or parables or the idea of God, there is a fruit that comes from thought that genuinely does that wrestling that cannot be gained any other way. Because you learn how to think that which you don't know you're thinking ahead of time. You learn how to think without a set goal. You learn to follow the theme, as an Andrew Luber may say, to follow the thread. Follow the thread is such an interesting phrase, and you hear that phrase all the time in these dialogues. Keeping the thread, following the thread. Thread of what? How do you know? How do you know there's a thread? It's just funny. People just sense there's a thread. Well, how do you know? If people gain the sense that there's a thread and they're following it, it's very mysterious. But that ability of even being able to tell there are untied threads. There are threads that we need to follow. There are threads that need to be pursued. That capacity of sensing the thread, that is huge. That most thinking has never even been introduced to that, of following the thread. And once you gain that, that goes a long way to, well, I think it's necessary for maturity, but that goes a long way to the development of the subject and is very, very important. I will also note that the scariness of the movement of contingency to determination, which is genuinely frightening, the grace of that is the ability to change the meaning of the past. And that's the retrospective move we learn in Hegel and Zizek. The very fact that something is always possible on the road ahead that changes the meaning of what came before is always the hope. There's a grace in that. The fact that things that cannot be undone can actually be seen in a new way, not through repression, but the meaning of it can transform, because this thing is the only reason why you went this way, which then is the road of maturity that then actually retrospectively go back and turns that thing that happened into a good thing. And I'm of the opinion that the probability of that retrospective redemption increases the more one acts out of courage than less, because courage actually seems to increase the probability of this occurring. That retrospective redemption and always knowing that possibility can help one face the fear of the movement of freedom, because there's always this retrospective possibility, and I think that's really important. To your question of orphans, this is very important because the characters are in a world where they have to decide their big other or they have no big other. And their parents are the embargo will end or it will not end. They have to decide themselves. They have to make their own family, per se. They have to make their own story. They have to make it themselves. And it's not given to them. And so they're in their very relationship, they're playing around with their very origin. What is our origin? What is our history? Is it the story of Cuba? Is it the story of Che? Is it the story of coming out of communism? Is it coming into communism or not? To what degree? So the story by which they ground their identities in being orphans is more so than just the theo-political. And then, of course, there are signs and evidence that what happens to the parents is tied to the theo-political, and that is suggested in subtle ways. So the role of orphans is to emphasize the placement in the theo-political, and there is also a sense in which we're all orphans when it comes to the theo-political. We all, in a sense. Well, you could say today in 2025, where the political is not in a set box, we don't really have parents. We don't have a bloodline that we can tie to. We have to think it anew. If God is dead, quote unquote, the big other is gone, then you're an orphan, right? People are orphans. And so the political has to be thought from the posture of the orphan. Likewise, love and fiction and writing and art are being thought from the posture of the orphan. So those are some reasons. There is more to be said on, of course, being an orphan also opened up the unfolding of the story in the way that it went in a believable manner. And also suggests it begs the question if the parents are looking for family and parents. Does Artemio want Che to be that's a father figure to him? Is Esperanza looking to be in the ballet school because he wants a family, so he wants a place or not? There's a question of how much are their motives tied to being orphans or not, and how much are they trying to address that through theo-political concerns, and how much can the relationship between them be the creation of a new family? So those are some of the reasons, but I'll pause and give it back to you, Daniel.
Awesome. That what you said there about the retroactivity in relation to the terror of contingency and determination, or freedom, the terror of freedom. That it is, yeah. That was incredibly soothing. I really appreciate you including that, because it's also kind of the engine that generates momentum in creativity or in speech. That this interfacing with the lack or with the shortcoming, like that you didn't quite get it, you didn't quite finish it, you didn't quite express it. So what was produced is insufficient. There's something lacking about it. Maybe, I suppose they can be different consequences. Sometimes it can be destructive what was let out, but what kind of gets the motion going is that sense of lack now puts you in response or in relationship to it, and so then you get the kind of drive that, say, like a Zizek or a Cadell has, or that you have, where you're just producing. Like the earliest memory that I have of that kind of quality was in painting, like painting something, and then it's just this feeling of the whole process is like a error correction.
Yes.
Because you're trying to get a sense of harmony or balance in the colors and like the composition, and just can't let it. Something inside of you is, and this this Platonic or Socrates on this idea of equality, asking the interlocutor to go find two equal sticks. And then it kind of prompts this question of, where does my idea of equality come from? Or since I can't find any equal sticks, where does it come from? So in the artwork, it's like adjusting it, putting colors so that it gets this sense of harmony, and then thinking like, where is that sense of harmony coming from? Like, where does that sense of balance where does it come from? And this has then had relevance in terms of how I would speak about it in terms of a subtle body might be aware, self-sense might be also like an immediate self-sense, and not like I suppose this is a reclamation of the sense immediacy at the end of the phenomenological journey, not the kind of sense immediacy. This is where a lot of my drive is in this artistic disposition to the self-sense, such that it talk about a subtle body, this error correction mode is stepped into and lent into, and not forsaken too soon, not given up too soon, so that the anatomy itself speaks of this kind of harmony. This is I appreciate the opportunity to express this, because we all come with what is latent in us and what is generated in us by our history, and the coming to speech is also the revelation of what that is. And there's also an inevitable dying process. Like you have to die to the former shape of the idea, and that's not always the best because of the identity that we get from having that idea. And part of that identity is, I think, also this death-like process of coming to speech. Now that I've said the thing, I don't have it in potential anymore. Now that I've made the artwork, I don't have it potentially with me that I could do it, and I can enjoy the fact of I could do it, but then it never comes to be. And so then I think the Gospel of Thomas, part of the Dead Sea Scrolls or something, if I don't bring out what is within me will be the end of me or kill me. But if I do bring out what is within me will save me. Something to this effect. I don't know if that's a direct quote. Wow. I've been surprised many times in this conversation, which is a joy. I'm gonna let me pass it back to you there. There's no specific direction of question.
Well, that idea of that intuition on the other side of absolute knowing, Aspasia, Seth and I, we've been talking about it. It's Aspasia's phrase, authentic resonance. And I think about authentic resonance in Jacob Kashir talks about resonance. Authentic resonance is, to put it very generally, absolute knowing plus intuition. Like those things go together. It's the intuition on the other side. Hegel starts the phenomenology of spirit, warning about the dangers of intuition. But then there's this way in which absolute knowing leads to a kind of intuition that is earned, costly intuition versus cheap, to use that Bonhoeffer distinction. And I'll call it apprehension, this ability to kind of apprehend. Authentic resonance is also very much trained in the creative act, and the creative act is indeed this kind of error. It's like this dialing. It's this dialing, feeling out. And critically, the creative act, since you don't know what you're making, you basically operate by what you're not making. I know this isn't it. This isn't it. This isn't it. The only way to advance towards something you don't know you're advancing toward is more in the negative, of course. It's going, that's not it. That's not it. Now, of course, you can say, well, how do you know it's not it if you don't know what the thing is? But what's very odd is anyone who does the creative act knows you can. It's very odd because the thing in the creative act, there's a difference between totally not knowing and kind of a silhouette. A silhouette is when you have a tree on the horizon, you don't see the details, but you see the outline. What's interesting, the kind of knowing you have in creativity feels more like you're dealing with silhouettes than you are like a hardened thing. And so you can identify that's not it because I know the silhouette of the thing, the outline of the thing. but I can't tell you what the silhouette is because it's a silhouette. I can't see it. I can only see the outline, but I can kind of tell what things it can't be according to the silhouette. So there's this kind of partial object, of course, to it. And creative acts are dealing with partial objects. And in fact, creative acts in dealing with partial objects train you for how to deal with everything in reality as a partial object, because that's a lot of what we actually need to learn to do, is to treat everything like partial objects, which means we treat them as particular and actually erotically then, because love and partial object goes together. When you fully know something, you don't love it. You actually get bored with it. Partiality, and the more specific a thing becomes, the more you know less of it. That's also the great interesting thing. Generalities we can know, definitions we can know, and I've spoken with Jochen about this, but the more something becomes a particular, the more it's actually mysterious, which is very odd. But in its particularity, it becomes partial. This definitely happens with people. You can know what a human is, you can know what a woman is, but Michelle, you have to relate, and it's always unfolding. As you move to the definitive, it becomes a partial object, and the partial object is then precisely the space of love, beauty, and also Lacan. So the love craft with the craft in parentheses, and you're learning in the creative act how to do a similar thing with basically everything. It's a training ground to have that mode for everything. I don't think it's by chance that so many philosophers who I think are thinking what needs to be thought today have a background in the arts, because they have a training with this process of dealing with silhouettes, dealing with partial objects, and operating by that's not it, to a thing that they don't know what it is, but also trust they'll recognize when they see it, which of course has to be a trust act, because you don't know if you will, and that's a courage act. So there's a necessary virtue there in the activity. I think also that retrospective possibility, basically you are making the point, as I heard it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the speech act itself has this retrospective quality. Like you get to the end, and at the end you hear the full that you were saying, you don't know where you're going, but you trust you'll reach a point that will then show where you were going, right? I basically am of the opinion that the speech act is isomorphic to reality. Like the way reality works is like the speech act. Speaking, and of course if God, in the beginning was the word, speaking and reality are tied together. Speaking is this very constant activity of contingency becoming determination that always has a retrospective possibility. Reality is the same. Reality itself is an unfolding in time of a contingency into determination that always has a retrospective possibility of changing the meaning of the past. Well, so occurs in speech. So training in the speech act can be good training for how to carry yourself in reality, because it's training to be more like reality is. And then learning how to do that with other people, it then moves you towards something basically Trinitarian. And that's where doing it with other people becomes the most difficult step, because it's kind of like if you can learn to do the speech act, then you can kind of be like God. But then if you can learn to do it with others, you can be like the Trinity. So you got to learn how to do one step, you got to move to greater specifics. But that of course is the great difficulty. There's a very real sense in which Esperanza is presenting the question of, can dance move Artemio into authentic resonance? Can the very sight of the dance move Artemio into the sense of love being present without it being said? When Artemio is speechless, is this a speechless of realization or hopelessness? Like, which is it? Does he succeed at communicating and showing that which cannot be said, or is that a doomed endeavor, right? Because I know when I myself am in quote unquote authentic resonance, but can I act in a manner to put you in authentic resonance? Can I or can I not? Can I plan it? Is it mysterious? Will the Spirit come? Can I, summon the Holy Spirit with a dance? Or is that pagan? Is that problematic witchcraft or something, right? Is that a hope, a false hope, a real hope? Esperanza has the hope that the dance will show what can't be told. Is this a foolish hope? Is this a wise hope? Is this an escapist hope? Well, the reader has to decide. And so there's something about Esperanza that is asking the question, can she generate authentic resonance in the other? Can you generate this feeling of resonance or not? What does art do? Is that what art does when it succeeds? Is that the form of resonance one feels when they encounter art that resonates with them or that they feel connection with? What is that feeling? Is it the same feeling? It seems like it's a very similar feeling that you're kind of pursuing when you pursue a thread. There's something like I'm on it. I connect with it. These seems to be similar emotions, but they're more complicated than how we tend to think of emotion as either happy or sad or something like that. But I'll pause there and give it back to you. But yes, the speech act is for me isomorphic to reality. Like the way speeching unfolds is actually like how time space unfolds. And I think that's very important because then learning how to speak can be learning how to align with actuality as time space, as this kind of creative unfolding we need to take seriously. But let me give it to you, Daniel.
No, it's an incredibly deep point that you ended with there, and I appreciate the flesh that you've given to it. Like speaking beings, like
Yeah.
this is our nature. Linking it to reality is potent. Linking it to the way that reality unfolds. So the site of speech is a site of participation in reality,
Yes.
which then means like if you put it into this really implicates us in our social organization and in our social relationships, like how we conduct our affairs. Is it the person standing up front speaking to the crowd? Is that the coordination of speech? What does that imply about how reality is being configured or seen or understood by
Yes.
that body? So like again, just the logical implication of the speech act, of where we speak, how we speak. And there's always I suppose there's always the self and other implied in that configuration. This that you said towards the end there, the reader has to decide is uh, definitely how I'm taking your work. And it's this very provocation, this very invitation that is in what we're speaking about, I think. This constant inviting into, drawing out from, education as this educia, this drawing from. That's wonderful. This I want to pin some things because it's what I'm going to continue thinking. It came out in the conversation with Cadell about like the it's not it's not it's not assured that drive will be good. It's not assured that it's good, or in fact it can be co-opted, or in fact we harm ourselves exactly in how it is co-opted. So then how do we think drive? Or the goodness of drive. My hunch and assumption, and so research, I think it will be in a similar domain as what you were speaking about as authentic resonance, but thinking about it anatomically or anatomy. I looked up the etymology for the word. It has something to do with cutting up, like cutting up. If you like, that's very close to a notion of sublation as cancel lifting. So just to pin, I'm exploring, definitely going to be exploring that more. Then just noting a point in this dialogue, I think it was 2 responses ago, where you're speaking about this third. And it was just this a glimmer or a glimpse for me as I realized that I'm simultaneously here sitting in my chair and on the screen. I'm like happening twice in this conversation. And it was just this moment, just this glimpse of, I mean, that is the case moment to moment of what is going on, but it hadn't, it was veiled to me. There was this unveiling sense of, okay, there's some 3 happening here, the screen, the affordance. This has been so rich.
But I was just going to say to that, the cutting up is fantastic. I think, again, there's something about one of the reasons why the social coordination mechanism can help is because you are training a relation with a third. It's recorded. There's an audience, but you forget there's an audience. So in a way, the third moves between you because you forget about it. So you hold yourself as if there's a third, but you gradually come to act as if the third is just in the two of you. So that subtle move that you can learn in this space, you can then learn off the internet. Like your brain, and then you can learn it as you relate to trees in the forest, dang it. So it's a very important training space. And one of the reasons I'm so bullish on it, the speaking beings, 100%. Plato suggests the republic, the structure of the republic is like a well-structured soul. Like the soul go together. There's a way in which the speaking, like well-ordered speech is a well-ordered society. It's like the soul is that I'm halfway tempted, you know, there's always this idea of what is the soul? The soul is a mysterious concept. It's in Christianity. It's not in Christianity. I know you mentioned Watchman Nee's. I think he has spirit, soul, and body. Like he'll talk about stand, walk, sit, like these kind of distinctions. There's an idea like the word soul and spirit get tied to rahai, which means wind. So the movement of the wind, the animating principle. But there's something about soul and speaking that seems really connected, and vibes and field, like these, that like soul music. There's something about soul that seems to be a quality of interaction. And if soul and speech goes together, which I really think they do, because how we speak with one another determines kind of the field we enter into, then it would make sense that well-ordered speech and a well-ordered political polis are tied together, actually. And that, because if polis is a space, like a place we are in together, and what determines the quality of the place we are in together, that's more than just space, but a field, well then speeching is directly political. Like it's directly political. You might even say it is politics. Like in a sense, speaking is the polis. Like, I mean, all things that define a polis are going to be coming from speech acts. They're going to be coming out of it. So speaking is the polis, which makes sense if speaking is isomorphic with reality itself. Because, and then of course the classical idea of Aristotle and all those cats, and Plato and all of them, is the idea that, yeah, to the degree you are like reality is to the degree you are aligned and good, and aligned with the beautiful, true, and the good. You know, it's all about being like actuality. Well, what is actuality then, right? Oh, it's the facts. Oh, it's the information. Well, what we are suggesting here is actuality is like the speech act. It's actuality is the movement of contingency. So all hyphens between this. Contingency to determination that opens retrospective possibility, like retrospective transformation, we can say. So contingency to determinacy with retrospective possibility. That structure, that is actuality. Actuality is not just determination. It's not just potential. It is the movement of contingency into determination that opens retrospective possibility, we will say. So that movement is actuality. So to the degree you and your habits align with that giant hyphenated phrase, and to the degree the political order aligns with that giant hyphenated phrase, is to the degree you're aligned with actuality and therefore have substance, and therefore have the possibility of the movement toward the beautiful. So if we identify the speech act as primary, and then think about structuring society as such, which is like reality, then you have that notion of alignment with actuality that is so critical to the classical thinkers. But you're doing it in a non-essentialist way, because that's the concern of the Foucaults and whatever. Well, if you talk this way, you could make an essence that's then totalitarian and oppressive. No. We are saying that that's a fair concern if the actuality is defined by a stable state. But if it is defined by a movement of contingency into determination with retrospective possibility, then the risks of essentialism go away, right? Because it starts with a contingency. So it's not a stable state, and it can change from situation. That structure, that long hyphenated word, that structure is present in all possible circumstances, but it is particular. Therefore, it is not totalitarian. The particular manifestation of that structure that is possible in all possible situations is not one that restricts particularity. It is a universal description of the unfolding of particularity. So it is not going to have the risks of essentialism and totalization that many people have speaking against classical metaphysics, because you're defining the actuality by a universal open structure that nevertheless is reliable, an open reliability, a determined contingency. That's the sweet spot that, in my opinion, is necessary and possible in absolute knowing in the side. But I will stop and give it to you, and you're awesome.
Daniel, yeah, this you've articulated something that I've had the intuition of, and strong enough intuition that it's the way that I structure what I do on Holy Cow. It's like I just have the sense that inviting to speak and observing in myself what this moves inside me, what this moves inside the other, coming to that process is like the central thing is this
Yep.
the speech act with the other.
Yep.
And creating, allowing for messiness, allowing for error, and taking the fixation off the end product. And then the question is like, what do you do if you've recorded something that is like it's blurry and it's like it's not so good? It's like it's the product isn't so good at the end, and the intuition has been like the fact of recording the process is more the point,
Yes.
or more the thing that I'm trying to point to by doing anything, by posting or whatever, by having a presence online. It's this constant gesturing towards the process, which I took up or inherited first from Plato's pointing. Plato's pointing in his art form at the dialogue. This piece on speech, I think it's because we read it recently in Aristotle's Politics. He differentiates the speech of other gregarious animals and humans because we use speech to determine what is expedient and inexpedient. So it's immediately in this space of justice. And he says, nature doesn't waste anything. So this is his account for why we speaking for justice. I also wanted to just, I mean, the logos, the living word, the word of God, the in Vedic tradition, old words for the Kundalini was vak or paravak, which is also voice or speech or something of this manner. This is the great conversation that is reality speaking itself, which is always a pleasure to get a glimmer of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am much of belonging again is about the freeing of speech, not just free speech, but the freeing of speech and the skills and methodologies that make that possible. I think basically, so the recording of the process is what is invaluable. So there are differences. So what's the difference between a model, a tutor, and a celebrity? So our age is flooded with celebrities, which people have confused as models. A celebrity shows you the end without the process, which then, of course, the celebrity has to hide the process, and they have to maintain a kind of false image that leads to pathology in them and their followers. A tutor invites you into the process. So they know the process, and they're going to invite you into it, okay? And that can be very valuable. But what's very interesting is classically, and of my opinion, what's actually, the tutor is no better than the presence of models. And models show you the process. They don't just walk you through the process, they show you it, actually. We are in an age that has been lacking models. People don't have models. They mostly have celebrities, they might have tutors, but they don't have models. And this is only getting worse and worse with the loss of the generational divide, the breakup of the family. Because the family typically is where you see your model, because you see your dad and you see your mom. You're going to see that process. Well, if parents aren't doing or being destroyed by the economy, or they're not ready, or there's pathologies, or parents don't know how to model because they weren't modeled, and they also, the jobs they had are nothing like the kids, as Cadell talks about, and then it's becoming more and more difficult for modeling to be found in the family. And then if the family is a nuclear family instead of a traditional family, there are not available resources of modeling in the community. The loss of the community and the loss of modeling is tied together. And we've tried to make up, we've tried to pretend like celebrity, tutor, and model are all the same. Hey, and they're celebrities, and you can get a tutor, and you have teachers, so we have models. No. Models show you the process. If we want people to move generally into absolute, if there is something about the movement into absolute knowing that is necessary for the theo-political movement, it is modeling that is going to be the means of increasing the probability of the average person moving into absolute knowing. Not tutoring, not celebrities. It's going to be modeling. And the reason why is because absolute knowing is uniquely particular. It is a process. So almost by definition, it can't be tutored. Now, you can have tutors in the thinkers to absolute knowing. You can have tutoring in the philosophical conversation that helps outline absolute knowing, and you can have tutoring to make one understand the difference between model, tutor, and celebrity. So tutoring matters, but ultimately the end has to be a model. This is very important. The end, whatever the end is, must be only demonstrationable. And, Joachim Williams and other people like demonstration is the highest principle. The highest principle cannot be a means. You can have tutors where there are means, but if what you're talking about is an end, you can only have models. So if what absolute knowing is the end, quote unquote, well then by definition, it can only be modeled. The absolute knowing itself, right? Well, that is what this technology now affords. This technology now affords the possibility of showing the model, showing the process. But the only way it's going to do that, though, is if you use the technology counterintuitively to the attentionalist dynamics. Because the attentionalist dynamics would have you be a celebrity. It may have you be a tutor. You can be the big other expert walking people things. But to be a model, no, that goes against all of the incentives of the system, right? So the only way to use this social coordination mechanism properly as a model mechanism is to go counter to the incentives. But if we can do that, I think the technology truly does open political, social, economic, etc. possibilities that were not possible before, because we can model absolute knowing. We can model the freeing of speech. We can model these things. And when you model it, you don't have to explain it. You're demonstrating it. And basically, all models are invitations. If I see it modeled, it is, by definition, inviting me to try it because I'm seeing it. So model and invitation is tied together. If Jesus models a way of life, he's indirectly inviting you. Want to try it? You can try it too, right? And so model and invitation and hence hospitality are tied. And hospitality is, Derrida, I think, was big on hospitality. Hospitality is ultimately what global pluralism requires. A people of whom are hospitable to difference. But how do you be hospitable to difference? We don't know the skill set. Well, it has to be modeled, and that's the work that we're doing. So I appreciate the chance to speak with you and continue on that work, Daniel. It's been a treat.
Well, yeah, Daniel, sure. It's a strange saying my name to you, but yeah, it's just an overabundance of riches. I'm very grateful for this conversation, specifically for the work that you've been engaged in for so long, for giving us artifacts like this, for the dance of hope as well, for Esperanza most specifically. A real pleasure. Like, I couldn't have had more fun. Like,
The same for me, Daniel.
Thank you,
The same
Daniel.
for me. Thank you so much. Best to you, sir. And I look forward to next time. Thank you, sir. All the best.